This thing has to be in the top 3 craziest cars ever made. Never mind any 1000 horsepower hypercar, this thing is mental. Welcome everyone to the Renault Espace F1. What Renault could have done in 1995 to celebrate 10 years of the Espace was whack some stickers on it, maybe stick a limited edition plaque on the dash, and maybe give it 10 horsepower more. A standard diesel Espace in 1995 had 92 horsepower. This thing has 800 horsepower, and we'll get stuck into what creates that power in a bit. What is the Espace F1? Well, it's a completely bespoke, one-off project created through a partnership between Renault, Williams F1 and Matra. Matra being a production partner of Renault that knows a thing or two about racing cars, hence all of this stuff around us, and hence why this car is currently sitting here in the Matra Museum. This Espace has a completely bespoke carbon fibre chassis underneath with carbon reinforced body panels slapped on top and some of the most iconic aerodynamic bits and bobs from the world of gaming. It still looks like an Espace, but one that's got some dodgy injectable liquid from his mate down the gym and has seen some serious gains. Most of you probably recognise this car from Gran Turismo 2, as it could be bought in the special section of the Renault dealership for 2 million credits. Those of you that played the game will probably hone straight into these iconic side blades here, although I'm sorry to report they're completely for style's sake. There's no function going on here. I was hoping that these would lead in and maybe do some brake cooling, maybe even as an intake for the engine in there, but no, they're just part of the door. They don't lead to anything, although look at the size of the door. It's massive. That is why this Espace is so wide body. It's all door. But yeah, sadly, that's quite disappointing because they looked so cool in the game. Also, something that's maybe slightly disappointing are the wheels. I do think these are the originals, but they're missing their covers, their sort of aerodynamic covers that would promote brake cooling. Maybe they're somewhere on a shelf in this museum, but they're not currently on the car. Although they do look original, they aren't modern wheels. Something I've always wanted to know about this car as well is at the front. With this car being so wide in the pictures, I wondered that for cooling, it maybe had side-mounted radiators, side pods, or did it have radiators at the front like an MPV? And I can report they're here at the front. This entire front section, all of these inlets are just taken up by radiator 1 and radiator 2. There is some ducting right down the middle. We'll investigate where that goes in a second. I also thought that these intakes either side would be for front brake cooling, but no, they're not intakes, they're actually outlets for the radiators. So the air comes in here and then the hot air comes out of here and down the side of the car. Now, have you ever wondered what's under the bonnet of an Espace F1? Let's find out. Not a whole lot. What have we got in here? That looks like the power steering. Got a big chunky anti-roll bar. That's the back of the pedal box. And then we've got the windscreen wiper mechanism here. I can't imagine that has ever been used in this car's life. Lots of carbon fibre, and this is probably the most interesting thing. It looks like it's missing a panel, but that looks like an intake. Yeah, if I get down super low, okay, it does feed straight down the middle of the car, and that is where the engine is sitting. I can't wait to show you guys that. But this looks like the way the engine gets some sort of air. I did wonder how it was fed, because there's no roof scoop or anything. Okay, that's very cool. Let's shut this down very carefully. So the answer is, what's under the bonnet of an Espace F1? Just some motorsport gubbins, really. Something I'm trying to figure out is the front suspension on this thing. We'll get to the rear in a bit, that's really special. But it's so hard to see. I mean, this thing is completely slammed. Not in a chavvy way, but in a pure motorsport way. There's no way this MPV is getting over a speed bump. The best I can do is get my head right in here. What I can see, there is a basic chassis. I wonder if that is a Space right in the middle there. And coming off of it, there's plates that have F1 style wishbones on them. They don't look like proper F1 wishbones, they look quite crude if I'm honest, but they're in the same style. If you watch footage of this thing back in the day, it looks like it's virtually got no suspension, skipping over every single bump in the road. It actually looks like a bit of a nightmare to drive, and that is probably why there's not much suspension travel going on in there. I think I may have solved something though. That circular middle intake in the front there, I think it diverts into two pipes and they cool the front brakes. I was wondering about the front brake cooling, because these weren't it. Were they getting any cooling at all? But you can actually see some ducting pipe that snakes in and goes straight to the brakes. If someone was mad enough to take an MPV or minivan touring car racing, you'd think it would look something like this. TWR took an estate car racing, this thing would be the next level. Let's move on to arguably the most iconic bit of bodywork on this Renault, this honker of a rear wing. This thing was front and center of your Gran Turismo gaming view. These big, long carbon support struts leading back to this dual element rear wing, and these massive end plates that have been rounded off as well. There's also this ducting. We'll see what that leads to in a second. But this thing sits so proud and high off the roofline of the car. This thing will have developed genuine downforce. Also, just in case you're wondering, I'm not standing on any proper chassis or carbon or anything. There's actually steel tubing throughout this car, so we're safe. By the way, a massive shout out to the Matra Museum for having us. Definitely check it out if you're heading down through the middle of France. The cool thing about this place is that a bunch of these cars are fully working examples. You just put the battery in, charge them up, and they're good to go. What's cool is this trip is sponsored by our channel partners CTEC, who have helped keep the DRIVETRIBE cars charged and healthy thanks to their CS1 charger. Now, we've seen in the comments that a lot of you guys think that your car's alternator is more than enough to keep your car's battery running and healthy, but it's not as easy as that. Yes, your car's alternator does charge up your battery, but not as much as you might think. At idle, or low speeds where most cars normally operate, an alternator's charging output is significantly reduced. On a modern vehicle, the alternator is not designed to charge the battery to 100%, as it has no absorption phase, instead having to run all the other systems on the car, which means you have to travel a long distance to achieve anywhere near 100% charge. And finally, frequent short trips don't give the alternator enough time to fully charge the battery, especially if it was already low. By plugging your car regularly into a CS1 charger, you can dramatically reduce the degradation of your battery. In a test that simulated 2 years of driving, batteries simply charged by alternators were put up against batteries that were also cared for by a CTEC charger once a month. The results showed that the alternator-only batteries suffered on average 38.5% degradation, versus the cared-for batteries that only lost on average 6.5%. That shows that regularly charging your battery with a CTEC charger can significantly slow down aging and extend the lifespan of your battery. Also, did you know there's such a thing as Charge Your Car Day? It's the 5th of October, so get yourself to the link in the description below, bag yourself a CS1 charger, and get charging. The stats on this car are pretty wild. The press release of the time said 800 brake horsepower, 0 to 62 miles an hour in 2.8 seconds, 0 to 120 in 6.9, and a top speed of 194 miles an hour. Want some more nostalgia? Here, have some more nostalgia. So what parts of a Renault Espace F1 are from an actual Espace? Well, most of the glass, the air vents inside, and the wing mirrors. Okay, let's cut the crap. Let's get to the best part of this vehicle, its engine, the reason it's called the F1. Now you may think because the radiators are at the front that it'll be somewhere under there. Or maybe it's completely rear engine, go full 911. No, this car's engine is right in the middle, right in here. Have you seen anything like it? This is an 800 horsepower Formula 1 engine mounted between the rear seats of an MPV. Or should I say, the rear seats are mounted around this incredible powertrain. What is this then? Well, it's the Renault RS5 engine, a 3.5 litre V10 that revs to around 14,000 RPM straight out of a Williams FW15C race car. That was designed by Adrian Newey and driven by Alain Prost and Damon Hill. Prost drove it to the championship in 1993. In here, it's apparently putting out 800 horsepower. Weirdly, in the F1 car, it was slightly less, in the high 700s. So this thing isn't an absolute V10 shrieker, only down at 14,000 RPM, before the engines went nuts up to 18, 19, 20,000, especially in the Renaults. Adrian Newey himself said that the V10 era is the greatest that F1 has ever seen, and that's why he's developing his own V10 to go in the RB17 hypercar with Cosworth as we speak. That thing is going to be nuts. Look at these inlet trumpets with this fuel rail directly on top. We've all seen the footage of the fuel being sprayed directly down these trumpets, the butterflies wide open and these engines screaming. What an amazing piece of engineering. Carbon, all the wiring, all the mounts. They've somehow mounted it into this minivan. We've got big coolant pipes running either side that will then go all the way to the front to those radiators. It is a stunning piece of kit. Now it looks like they shouldn't always be exposed. Can you imagine this thing being driven and you sitting in the back seat with these trumpets literally inches from you wide open? It looks like there should be a carbon cover that comes all the way forwards and attaches to the tunnel, which is then fed from the front. It's cool it's been left in this configuration, fully open for us to see, but it's not that convenient, is it? Imagine you've got your kids in the back, they've got their Haribo, crisps, a Red Bull, you go over a speed bump and half of it ends up down your inlet trumpets. What happens to a 90s F1 engine when you put Haribo, crisps and Red Bull down it? Imagine hydro-locking your F1 engined MPV. If anything, these things have 6-point harnesses. I'd install 10-point harnesses to keep those sticky-fingered cretins in place. Do not mess with Daddy's V10. After the relatively rudimentary front suspension, at the back it's literally pure F1. This is the rear end of an FW14 F1 car. Proper F1 wishbones, drive shafts, everything. All of it is mounted off of the gearbox and the rear diff, just like in a Williams F1 car from the 90s. We have got an answer to those roof ducts that were between the rear wing. They come down here through these beautiful pieces of snaking carbon either side, and they are for brake cooling. Something that may have helped this V10 create more power than in the F1 car is the exhaust routing. In the F1 car they can be quite compact, while in here they seem to have much more space. We've got these 2 outlets, I can't really see in there, but it will go from 5 into 1 down here, and then you've got 2 outlets out the back either side. Beautiful. So you could see this thing as MPV in the front with some quite crude F1 modifications, and then a pure Williams F1 car at the back. What a piece of kit. I think the lesson to learn from this car is that putting F1 engines in non-F1 cars is fun, but only for the short PR rollout of the car and the odd bits in and around its launch, like the Renault at Goodwood. These engines are so highly strung, the tolerances are so tight, the maintenance is brutal, expensive and time consuming. So much so that the manufacturers that do such a thing generally engine swap them to keep the vehicle mobile into the future. Ford swapped the Formula 1 HB V8 out of the Supervan 3 and in went a road car V6 to make it much easier to wheel out for events. Most other F1 cars have 4-cylinder turbo engines subbed in or slightly less stressed Judd engines. Here is a perfect example then of an original car with its original F1 engine, and it sat here static in a museum and has done for more than 20 years. Is that sad? Should that engine be taken out and something more serviceable put in, like a Judd F1 V10 or maybe even a Renault Performance road car engine, something that can actually get this thing moving? Some intel I'd like to bring into this discussion is something I learned from a very reputable engine builder back in the UK. They said that getting spare parts, spare engines or engine drawings from Renault is a nightmare. It virtually doesn't happen. They're so tight with their F1 IP that they will not let it become public knowledge, even though some of it is 30 years old. So if you are a private owner of a Williams Renault F1 car, or you somehow bought this thing, you would have a serious job getting it back running. You would have to reverse engineer your F1 V10 engine to then manufacture your own custom parts to get it running, and fingers crossed that they would work. It's a serious job because Renault are simply not willing to let any of this information go. Maybe the guys and girls here at the Matra Museum would get a pass due to their connection with Renault, but any privateer who hypothetically would want to restore this car would have a hell of a job. It's sad, but that be how it be. To get some dopamine going, seeing as we can't fire it up today, let's tap into some old school PR footage from back in the day of this incredible car being spanked by Alain Prost and Jean Ragnotti. How unbelievably sensitive does that throttle sound? You cannot tiptoe around it. It wants definitive inputs, otherwise the car's just jumping all over the place. You do have 3 pedals down here. You've got a clutch, brake and throttle. I imagine the clutch is just to get off the line, and then you're on to the steering wheel. What's really interesting about the timing of this car is that it's right at that F1 transition between H-pattern manual boxes and paddle shift. This car has buttons, essentially switches. So on the left to go down a gear and on the right to go up a gear, purely electronic. Bang in front of me, I've got a very simplistic digital rev counter that's got LEDs above it, I imagine for rev limit. And then the rest of the dash is just pure motorsport. You've got your brake balance down here, traction control settings, gearbox settings, and then it's just carbon, 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 carbon. It's a beautiful thing. I imagine this is an original Espace steering wheel, but the innards have been ripped out and been replaced by more carbon with all of the Formula 1 centric buttons. I don't know what the other 3 do on here. I'm not going to press them, especially that big red one. As for the condition of the car, well, I guess it's barely been used. It's been wheeled out for a few events, but then sat in a museum, so it's in really good nick. Although I feel the vibe around this car, even though it looks as it does, it's going to be a museum piece forevermore. It's apparently incredibly difficult to maneuver as well. We initially asked for this car to be put in this museum space here to give us a kind of 360 of the vehicle and not be up against that railing. But apparently the steering lock is so tight, and with these massive slick tires, it's really, really difficult to move 6 feet, never mind drive it. So sadly, this 200-mile-an-hour F1 engined Renault Espace is currently as immobile as it gets. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. I've been Mike, and don't forget to subscribe to DRIVETRIBE.